Marcus Reed sat in the corner of the massive conference room and watched the alien engineers argue about quantum flux calculations. The room buzzed with voices speaking in dozens of languages, some through translators that made strange clicking sounds. Holographic displays showed complex mathematical formulas that hurt his eyes to look at. Everyone seemed to be talking at once. The meeting had been going on for 3 hours. Marcus had said maybe 10 words the entire time. He preferred it that way. While the others fought over theories and concepts that existed only in computer simulations, he studied the actual blueprints of what they were trying to build. The Galactic Engineering Consortium had chosen him for this project because Earth was now part of the galactic community. The treaty said humans had to be included in major construction projects. Most of the aliens saw this as a political move, not because they actually wanted human help. Marcus understood this perfectly well. He had spent his whole career being underestimated. Even on Earth, people thought metallurgical engineering was boring. Out here among the stars, surrounded by beings who could manipulate matter at the quantum level, his knowledge of how metals behaved under stress seemed almost primitive. The project they were discussing was enormous. They wanted to build an orbital defense platform around Nexus Prime, the most important world in the galactic core. The station would be the size of a small moon, with weapons powerful enough to destroy entire fleets. It would take 5 years to build and cost more money than most planets made in a decade. Lead engineer Vorth stood at the front of the room, his tall Valkyrie frame casting shadows across the holographic displays. His people were known throughout the galaxy for their brilliant minds and their complete confidence in their own abilities. Vorth had designed 17 major space stations, each one more impressive than the last. The trilithium steel composite will provide the perfect balance of strength and flexibility. Vorth explained to the group. His voice carried the tone of someone who had never been wrong about anything important. Our quantum modeling shows it can withstand pressures that would crush conventional materials. Marcus looked down at his tablet and frowned. He had been running his own calculations on trilithium steel for weeks. The material was incredibly strong. That much was true. But it had some strange properties that worried him. Under certain conditions, the molecular bonds could become unstable. If that happened while the material was under stress, the results could be catastrophic. Engineer class of the Thuron spoke up from across the room. Her people were master builders, responsible for some of the most beautiful structures in known space. The construction timeline is already aggressive, she said in a precise, clipped accent. We cannot afford delays for unnecessary testing. Several other engineers nodded in agreement. The project was already behind schedule, and the Galactic Council was asking questions about the delays. Everyone wanted to start construction as soon as possible. Marcus cleared his throat quietly and raised his hand. The room didn't notice at first. He had to clear his throat again, louder this time, before the conversations died down. I have a concern about the trilithium steel, he said. His voice sounded small in the vast room. I think we should run some additional stress tests before we commit to using it for the main structure. Vorth turned to look at him with the expression someone might use when a child interrupted an important adult conversation. Dr. Reed, I appreciate your caution, but we have already run extensive computer simulations. The material is perfectly safe. My calculations show some potential problems with harmonic resonance. Marcus continued. He tapped his tablet, and a simple graph appeared on a section of the holographic display. If the structure is subjected to certain frequencies, the molecular bonds in the trilithium steel could begin to fail. Engineer class laughed, a sound like breaking glass. Harmonic resonance? Dr. Reed, we are not building a musical instrument. We are creating a defense platform with quantum-enhanced structural integrity. I understand that, Marcus said patiently. But metals still follow basic physical laws, even when they have been enhanced. If the weapon systems create vibrations at the wrong frequency, it could cause a cascade failure. Vorth's expression grew even more condescending. Dr. Reed, with respect, your species has been working with metals for what, a few thousand years? The Valkyrie have been manipulating trilithium compounds for 3 centuries. I think we understand the properties better than your primitive computer models can predict. Marcus felt his face grow warm, but he kept his voice steady. I am not questioning your expertise with trilithium. I am just suggesting that we take some extra time to make sure we understand how it will behave under all possible conditions. All possible conditions? Vorth spread his arms wide. Dr. Reed, there are infinite variables in any complex system. We cannot test for every theoretical scenario. That is why we use advanced modeling instead of crude trial and error methods. The other engineers began to murmur among themselves. Marcus caught fragments of conversation in various languages. Most of it was not complimentary. He heard the word primitive mentioned several times. Commander Rex of the Krex military leaned forward in his chair. His people were warriors first and engineers second, but they had a practical approach to problems that Marcus usually appreciated. The human raises a valid point about testing. Rex said slowly, "In combat, equipment fails in ways you do not expect." Vorth's eyes flashed with irritation. "Commander, this is not a battlefield repair. This is precision engineering, using the most advanced materials known to science. Dr. Reed's concerns are based on outdated thinking about conventional metals." "Trilithium steel is still a metal," Marcus said quietly. "It just has some quantum properties added to it. The basic atomic structure is still there, and it still has to obey the laws of physics." "The laws of physics as understood by humans," Class interjected, "which is to say, a very limited understanding indeed." Marcus looked around the room and saw the expressions on the faces of the other engineers. Some looked amused, as if they were watching an entertaining show. Others looked impatient, as if he was wasting their valuable time. A few looked genuinely puzzled, as if they could not understand why he was being so stubborn about something so obvious. He realized that nothing he said was going to change their minds. They had already decided that human engineering was primitive and that his concerns were based on ignorance rather than knowledge. To them, he was like someone from the Stone Age trying to give advice about rocket science. Marcus closed his tablet and sat back in his chair. "I think we should at least document my concerns in the official record," he said. "If there are problems later, it might be important to know that someone raised these issues during the planning phase." Vorth waved his hand dismissively. "Of course, Dr. Reed. All concerns are noted in the record, no matter how theoretical they might be." The meeting moved on to other topics. Marcus listened with half his attention, while the rest of his mind worried about the problems he could see coming. He had spent 20 years studying how materials failed under stress. He knew the warning signs when he saw them. The trilithium steel had incredible strength, but that strength came at a cost. The quantum enhancements that made it so durable also made it unpredictable under certain conditions. Marcus had run simulation after simulation, and they all showed the same thing. If the material was subjected to the right combination of stress and harmonic frequency, it would not just break. It would tear itself apart at the molecular level. The weapon systems they were planning to install on the station would be incredibly powerful. When they fired, they would create vibrations that would travel through the entire structure. Marcus had calculated the frequencies those vibrations would produce, and some of them fell right in the dangerous range for trilithium steel. He opened his tablet again and began making notes. If the other engineers would not listen to his warnings, he would at least make sure those warnings were properly documented. Someone needed to keep a record of what was discussed and what decisions were made. As the meeting finally ended, Marcus gathered his materials and prepared to leave. Vorth approached him as the room emptied. "Dr. Reed," the Valkyrie engineer said, his tone now almost friendly, "I hope you understand that we are not dismissing your input, because you are human. We simply have to make decisions based on the best available science." Marcus looked up at the tall alien and nodded slowly. "I understand your position," he said. "I just hope my concerns turn out to be wrong." Vorth smiled, showing teeth that were too sharp and too white. "I am quite confident they will be. Human intuition is admirable, but it is no substitute for proper scientific analysis." Marcus left the conference room and walked down the long corridor toward his quarters. Through the transparent walls, he could see the construction site where the orbital platform was already beginning to take shape. Robotic workers swarmed over the skeletal framework, welding beams and installing systems according to the plans that had just been approved. It would be beautiful when it was finished, a marvel of engineering that would protect one of the most important worlds in the galaxy. Marcus genuinely hoped he was wrong about the problems he had identified. But deep in his heart, he knew he was not wrong. He had seen too many structures fail in exactly the ways that everyone said were impossible. Metal had its own rules, its own limits, its own ways of telling you when it was being pushed too far. Marcus reached his quarters and sat down at his desk. He opened his computer and began writing a detailed report about his concerns. If no one would listen to him now, at least there would be a record when things went wrong later. Marcus had been working on the orbital platform project for 3 months when he made his first real discovery about the trilithium steel problem. He was alone in his small laboratory, running tests on sample pieces of the metal that had been sent from the construction site. The lab was quiet except for the hum of computers and the occasional beep from his testing equipment. The sample had been cut from one of the main support beams that would hold the station's central weapons array. It looked perfect to the naked eye, smooth and silver with a slight blue tint that showed its quantum enhancement. Marcus placed it in his resonance chamber and began applying different frequencies of vibration. For the first hour, nothing unusual happened. The metal responded exactly as the Valkyrie specifications predicted. It absorbed the vibrations without any sign of stress or fatigue. Marcus began to think that maybe his concerns had been wrong after all. Then he reached frequency level 743 Hz. The metal sample suddenly began to sing. It was a high, clear note that reminded Marcus of wind blowing through a narrow canyon. As he increased the frequency slowly, the note grew higher and more intense. At 812 Hz, something changed. The singing stopped and the metal became completely silent. But when Marcus looked at it under his microscope, he could see tiny fractures forming along the crystal boundaries. Marcus spent the next 6 hours documenting what he had found. He took photographs, recorded sound samples, and ran stress analysis on the fractured areas. The results were worse than he had feared. The trilithium steel was not just developing cracks. The quantum enhancements that made it so strong were actually working against it under harmonic stress. The enhanced molecular bonds were trying to maintain their integrity, but the vibrations were forcing them to resonate in ways that tore the crystal structure apart from the inside. He wrote up his findings in a detailed report and submitted it to the engineering committee the next morning. Marcus knew that Engineer Vorth would not be happy to receive it, but the evidence was too clear to ignore. The trilithium steel had a fatal weakness that could destroy the entire station if it was triggered by the wrong combination of frequencies. 3 days passed before Marcus received a response. It came in the form of a short message from Vorth's assistant. The report had been reviewed and filed. The engineering committee had decided that the test conditions were not representative of actual operational parameters. No changes to construction plans were required. Marcus stared at the message for a long time. He had expected resistance, but he had not expected his findings to be dismissed so completely. He decided to try a different approach. Engineer class was supervising the installation of structural components in the station's main assembly bay. Marcus found her standing on a platform overlooking construction area, watching robotic welders work on a massive beam that would support one of the primary weapon mounts. The beam was made of trilithium steel, and it was identical to the sample that had fractured in his laboratory. Engineer class, Marcus said as he approached her, "I would like to discuss some modifications to the welding process." Class turned to look at him with the same expression of mild irritation that most of the alien engineers wore when he spoke to them. "Dr. Reed, what kind of modifications?" Marcus had his tablet ready with detailed diagrams. "I have found that the trilithium steel becomes unstable under certain harmonic conditions. If we modify the welding frequency and add some dampening materials at key stress points, we can prevent resonance problems." "Resonance problems," Class repeated slowly. "Dr. Reed, we have been using these welding techniques for decades. The Thuron are master builders. We do not have resonance problems." "I know your people are excellent builders," Marcus said patiently, "but this is a new material with properties that we are still learning about. My tests show that the quantum enhancements can create unexpected vulnerabilities." Class looked at his diagrams for exactly 30 seconds before handing the tablet back to him. "Dr. Reed, your species barely understands metallurgy beyond the most primitive level. We have been working with trilithium compounds for 3 centuries. I think we know more about their properties than your simple Earth-based testing can reveal. But the evidence Marcus began. The evidence, class interrupted, is that trilithium steel is the strongest material known to galactic science. Your tests were conducted under artificial laboratory conditions that have no relation to real-world applications. The welding process will continue as planned. Marcus left the assembly bay feeling frustrated and increasingly worried. He had clear proof that the trilithium steel could fail catastrophically, but no one was willing to listen. Worse, they seemed to think that his human origin automatically made his findings suspect. Over the next few weeks, Marcus tried approaching other members of the engineering team. He spoke with Dr. Tam of the Nexery, who specialized in structural dynamics. Tam listened politely to his concerns and then explained that human understanding of quantum-enhanced materials was too limited to be relevant to the project. Marcus tried to show his test results to Commander Rex, but the Krex officer told him that military specifications had already been approved and could not be changed without approval from the Galactic Council. Each rejection made Marcus more determined to find someone who would take his warnings seriously. He expanded his testing program, using samples of trilithium steel from different parts of the construction site. Every piece showed the same weakness. When subjected to harmonic frequencies in the 800 Hz range, the material began to fail in ways that the alien computer models could not predict. Marcus calculated the frequencies that the station's weapons would produce when they fired. The primary plasma cannons would create vibrations at exactly 796 Hz. The secondary missile launchers would add harmonics at 804 Hz. When both systems fired together, the combined frequency would be 812 Hz, the exact frequency that had caused his test samples to fracture. He documented everything in a series of reports that he submitted to every member of the engineering committee. The responses were always the same. His concerns were noted but not considered relevant to actual construction. The alien engineers had their own testing methods, their own computer models, their own understanding of how materials behaved. Human input was welcome, but only if it agreed with what they already knew to be true. Marcus began to realize that the problem was not really about the trilithium steel. The problem was about trust and respect. The alien engineers did not trust human science because they believed it was primitive compared to their own knowledge. They did not respect Marcus as an equal because his species had only recently joined the galactic community. This understanding made him angry, but it also made him more careful. If the aliens would not listen to his warnings through official channels, he would have to find other ways to protect the people who would be living and working on the station. Marcus began making unauthorized modifications to his laboratory tests. He acquired samples of other materials that were being used in the station's construction. He tested the support cables that would hold the living quarters in place. He analyzed the metal plating that would protect the main computer cores. He examined the structural joints that would connect the different sections of the station together. Most of the materials performed exactly as their specifications promised, but some showed the same harmonic vulnerabilities as the trilithium steel. Marcus realized that the problem was not limited to one type of metal. The quantum enhancement process that made materials stronger also made them susceptible to resonance failures under specific conditions. He began working on solutions. If the alien engineers would not prevent the problem, maybe he could find ways to minimize the damage when it occurred. Marcus designed harmonic dampeners that could be installed at critical stress points. He calculated escape routes that would remain intact even if major structural sections failed. He identified the most vulnerable areas of the station and developed emergency protocols for evacuating those sections quickly. All of this work had to be done in secret. Marcus knew that if the other engineers discovered what he was doing, they would consider it an act of sabotage. They had made it clear that they did not want human interference in their carefully planned project. The construction continued on schedule. Every day, Marcus watched through his laboratory window as more trilithium steel beams were installed, more quantum-enhanced components were welded into place, more potential failure points were created. The station was beginning to look like the marvel of engineering that Vorth and the others had promised. It was also becoming the disaster that Marcus had predicted. 6 months into construction, Marcus received a message that made his blood run cold. The weapons testing schedule had been moved up, Instead of waiting until the station was completed, the military wanted to begin firing tests as soon as the primary systems were installed. Commander Rex explained that this would allow them to identify and fix any problems early in the construction process. Marcus knew that this was exactly the wrong thing to do. Firing the weapons while the structure was still incomplete would create unpredictable stress patterns. The trilithium steel would be subjected to harmonic frequencies while it was already under construction loads. The combination could trigger the cascade failure that he had been warning about for months. He submitted one final report to the engineering committee. This time, he did not focus on technical details or scientific analysis. He simply stated that weapons testing should be delayed until the station was complete and all structural components had been properly tested. He requested a personal meeting with lead engineer Vorth to discuss the safety implications. The response came back within hours. His request for a meeting was denied. Weapons testing would proceed as scheduled. Dr. Reed's concerns had been noted in the official record, but they were not considered sufficient reason to delay the project timeline. Marcus sat in his laboratory that night and looked out at the half-finished station. In 3 weeks, they would begin firing the weapons that would tear it apart. Thousands of people would be on board by then, living and working in a structure that was destined to fail. He had done everything he could through proper channels. Now he would have to find another way to save them. The dedication ceremony for the orbital defense platform was scheduled to be the largest gathering of galactic dignitaries in over a century. Representatives from 47 different worlds had traveled to Nexus Prime to witness the unveiling of what the media was calling the greatest engineering achievement in known history. Marcus stood on the observation deck of the completed station and watched the shuttlecraft arriving in an endless stream, each one carrying politicians, military leaders, scientists, and journalists who wanted to be part of this historic moment. The station was magnificent to behold. It stretched for kilometers in every direction, its trilithium steel hull gleaming like polished silver in the light of Nexus Prime's twin suns. Weapon ports dotted its surface like stars, each one capable of destroying a battleship with a single shot. The engineering sections hummed with the power of quantum reactors that could supply energy to an entire planet. Living quarters housed 10,000 people in comfort that rivaled the finest hotels on the core worlds. Marcus had to admit that the alien engineers had created something beautiful. If his calculations were wrong, it would stand as a monument to galactic cooperation and advanced technology for generations to come. If his calculations were right, it would become the site of the worst engineering disaster in recorded history within the next few hours. The ceremony began at noon with speeches from dignitaries who praised the vision and skill of the engineers who had made this achievement possible. Admiral Zed of the Krek spoke about the strategic importance of the platform for defending the galactic core. Chancellor Moore of Nexri discussed the scientific advances that had been necessary to create such a marvel. Lead Engineer Vorth received the highest civilian honor that the Galactic Council could bestow, recognition of his brilliant leadership in bringing together the finest minds from across known space. Marcus was not mentioned in any of the speeches. His name did not appear in the official program or in any of the news reports about the ceremony. As far as the galaxy was concerned, this was an achievement of alien science and engineering. The human contribution to the project had been so minor as to be essentially invisible. He did not mind being overlooked. His attention was focused on the subtle vibrations he could feel through the deck plates beneath his feet. The station was not completely still. Like any large structure, it had natural frequencies at which it tended to oscillate. Marcus had calculated these frequencies months ago, and he knew that they were close to the danger zone for trilithium steel. The vibrations grew stronger when the ceremonial weapons demonstrations began. Admiral Zed had planned a series of test firings that would showcase the platform's incredible firepower. The first demonstration used only the secondary plasma cannons, smaller weapons designed for engaging fighter craft and light cruisers. When they fired, Marcus felt the deck plates shiver beneath his feet. The frequency was exactly what he had predicted, but it was not yet strong enough to cause structural damage. The second demonstration fired the primary plasma cannons for the first time since the station had been completed. These were massive weapons, each one larger than most starships, capable of destroying a heavy cruiser with a single shot. When they fired, the entire station rang like a bell. Marcus could hear the high, Clear note of trilithium steel under stress. The same sound he had recorded in his laboratory tests. Most of the dignitaries applauded the impressive display of firepower. A few noticed vibrations and asked their escorts about them. The alien engineers assured everyone that such effects were completely normal for a structure this size. Large space stations always vibrated when their weapons fired. It was nothing to be concerned about. Marcus knew better. He pulled out his tablet and began recording the frequency measurements from the sensors he had secretly installed throughout the station. The readings confirmed his worst fears. The trilithium steel was being subjected to harmonic stress levels that were approaching the failure threshold. If the weapons continued firing at these frequencies, the cascade failure will begin within hours. He tried to approach Admiral Zet during the break between demonstrations, but security personnel blocked his path. The Admiral was surrounded by high-ranking officials and could not be disturbed by unauthorized personnel. Marcus showed his identification as a member of the engineering team, but the guards informed him that he lacked sufficient security clearance to speak directly with the Admiral during a formal ceremony. Marcus next tried to reach Engineer Vorth, but the Valkyrie was busy giving interviews to journalists from across the galaxy. When Marcus finally managed to get close enough to speak to him, Vorth barely looked up from the cameras. "Dr. Reed," Vorth said with a distracted smile, "I hope you are enjoying the ceremony. Your contribution to this project will not be forgotten. Engineer Vorth, I need to speak with you privately about the structural readings I am getting from the trilithium steel." Marcus said urgently, "The weapons demonstrations are creating dangerous resonance patterns." Vorth's smile became strained. "Dr. Reed, this is neither the time nor the place for technical discussions. I am sure that whatever concerns you have can wait until after the ceremony." "They cannot wait," Marcus insisted. "The frequency readings show that we are approaching critical stress levels. If the weapons continue firing at these power levels, the structure could begin to fail." "Dr. Reed," Vorth said more firmly, "your concerns have been noted and filed. The station is performing exactly as designed. Now, please, allow me to complete these interviews." Marcus was pushed aside by Vorth's assistants and found himself back in the crowd of dignitaries. He looked around desperately for someone else who might listen to his warnings. Commander Rex was standing near the main viewing port, watching the preparations for the final demonstration with professional interest. "Commander Rex," Marcus said as he approached the Crex officer, "I need to report a potential structural problem with the station." Rex turned to look at him with a neutral expression that military people used when dealing with civilians. "Dr. Reed, what kind of problem?" "The weapons demonstrations are creating harmonic resonance in the trilithium steel structure," Marcus explained quickly. "My sensors are showing stress levels that could lead to cascade failure. We need to stop the firing tests immediately. Do you have authorization to make this kind of safety recommendation?" Rex asked. "I am a member of the engineering team," Marcus said. "I have been documenting structural concerns throughout the construction process. But do you have specific authorization from the project leadership to halt weapons testing?" Rex pressed. "This is a formal military ceremony with representatives from 47 worlds in attendance. I cannot stop the demonstrations based on unofficial concerns from a junior engineer." Marcus felt his frustration boiling over. "Commander, in 10 minutes they are going to fire all the primary weapons simultaneously. The combined harmonic frequency will be exactly 812 hertz. That is the resonance frequency that causes trilithium steel to fracture at the molecular level. I have documented proof of this weakness." Rex studied him for a moment. "Dr. Reed, your concerns are noted. However, I cannot halt a formal military demonstration without direct orders from Admiral Zet or confirmation of immediate danger from the senior engineering staff. Have you discussed this with Engineer Vorth?" "Yes, and he refused to listen," Marcus said desperately. "None of them will listen because they think human science is too primitive to be relevant." "Then I suggest you continue working through proper channels," Rex said dismissively. "If there is truly a safety issue, the senior engineers will address it." Marcus realized that he was not going to convince anyone through official channels. The ceremony was proceeding exactly as planned, and nothing he said was going to change that. He looked at his tablet and saw that the final demonstration was scheduled to begin in 8 minutes. He made a decision that would either save thousands of lives or end his career in disgrace. Marcus slipped away from the main gathering and headed for the nearest maintenance access panel. If he could not stop the weapons test through official channels, he would have to stop it himself. The maintenance corridors of the station were narrow and dimly lit, designed for robotic repair units rather than human-sized personnel. Marcus had spent months studying the station's blueprints, and he knew exactly where to go. The primary weapons control systems were located in a heavily shielded section near the station's core, but they relied on power conduits that ran through more accessible areas. Marcus reached the power distribution center just as he heard the announcement that the final demonstration was about to begin. Through the thin walls of the maintenance corridor, he could hear the excited voices of the dignitaries as they prepared to witness the platform's full firepower for the first time. He opened the access panel to the main power conduits and looked at the maze of cables and control circuits that supplied energy to the weapon systems. Marcus was not an expert in Valkyrie power systems, but the basic principles were the same as human technology. If he could create a temporary power fluctuation, it might be enough to delay the weapons test until he could convince someone to listen to his warnings. Marcus reached the primary power coupling just as the countdown began. He could hear Admiral Zet's voice over the station's communication system, announcing that the final demonstration would showcase the platform's ability to destroy multiple targets simultaneously. All primary weapons would fire together in a coordinated barrage that would demonstrate the station's incredible power. 10. The Admiral's voice echoed through the corridors. 9. 8. 7. Marcus grabbed the power coupling and prepared to disconnect it. If he was wrong about the structural weakness, he would be arrested for sabotage and his career would be over. If he was right, disconnecting the power might save the station and everyone on it. 6. 5. 4. Marcus hesitated for one final moment. Around him, he could hear the trilithium steel beginning to sing as the weapon systems powered up. The frequency was already approaching the danger zone, and the weapons had not even fired yet. 3, 2, 1. Fire. Marcus yanked the power coupling free, just as the weapons discharged. The lights in the maintenance corridor flickered and went dark. Emergency power kicked in a moment later, bathing everything in red light. Through the walls, Marcus could hear confused voices as the ceremony was thrown into chaos by the sudden power failure. But he could also hear something else. A high, keening note that seemed to come from the very bones of the station itself. The trilithium steel was singing, and the song was growing louder. Marcus had stopped the weapons from firing at full power, but he realized with growing horror that it might already be too late. The brief moment of discharge had been enough to trigger the resonance cascade. Somewhere in the station structure, the first crack was beginning to form. Marcus crawled through the maintenance corridor as fast as he could move while emergency alarms blared throughout the station. The red emergency lighting cast strange shadows on the walls, and he could hear angry voices echoing from the main ceremony hall above him. Security teams were already searching for whoever had caused the power failure that had disrupted the weapons demonstration. The singing from the trilithium steel was getting louder. It was no longer the clear, high note he had heard during his laboratory tests. Now it was a complex harmony of different frequencies, as if the entire structure was trying to find its natural resonance. Marcus knew what that meant. The cascade failure had begun, and it was spreading through the station's framework faster than he had calculated. He reached another access panel and pulled out his tablet to check the structural sensors he had installed throughout the station. The readings made his blood run cold. Stress fractures were appearing in support beams throughout the central section. The trilithium steel was not breaking cleanly like normal metal would. Instead, it was developing a network of microscopic cracks that weakened the entire molecular structure. Marcus calculated that he had perhaps 2 hours before the damage became irreversible. After that, nothing would be able to stop the station from tearing itself apart. He had to find a way to install his harmonic dampeners at the critical stress points he had identified months ago, and he had to do it without being caught by security. The dampeners were simple devices, no larger than his fist, designed to absorb and redirect harmonic vibrations before they could build up to dangerous levels. Marcus had built them in secret over the past several months, using materials he had requisitioned for other projects. He had hidden them in various storage compartments throughout the station, waiting for an opportunity to install them. The first installation point was in the main structural junction that connected the central hub to the weapons platform. Marcus crawled through a narrow service tunnel that ran alongside the primary support beam. The tunnel was barely wide enough for his shoulders, and emergency lighting made it difficult to see more than a few meters ahead. As he worked his way toward the installation point, Marcus could hear security teams searching the corridors above him. Their voices carried clearly through the thin walls of the maintenance areas. Admiral Zed had ordered a complete lockdown of the station until the saboteur was found. No one was allowed to leave their assigned areas without authorization. Marcus reached the structural junction and carefully opened the access panel. The massive trilithium steel beam was visible through the opening, and he could see the hairline cracks that were already beginning to form along its surface. The metal was under tremendous stress, and the cracks were spreading slowly but steadily. He pulled the first harmonic dampener from his tool bag and began the delicate process of attaching it to the beam. The device had to be positioned precisely at the stress point where the harmonic vibrations were strongest. Too far off, and it would be useless. Too close to the cracks, and the installation process might cause the beam to fail immediately. Marcus worked by feel as much as by sight. He had practiced this installation procedure dozens of times in his laboratory, but never under these conditions. His hands were shaking from adrenaline and fear, and emergency lighting made it difficult to see the fine details of the mounting points. The dampener clicked into place with a soft sound that was almost lost in the singing of the stress metal. Immediately, Marcus could hear a change in the harmonics. The complex chord of frequencies became slightly simpler as the dampener began absorbing some of the vibrations. It was working, but one dampener was not enough to stop the cascade failure. Marcus crawled to the next installation point, a junction where 3 major support beams met to form the backbone of the station's structural framework. This location was more exposed, with wider corridors and better lighting. He would have to be more careful to avoid the security patrols. He could hear voices approaching as he worked on installing the second dampener. Marcus pressed himself against the wall of the maintenance corridor and held his breath as 2 security officers walked past. They were discussing the search for the saboteur, and one of them mentioned that they found evidence of tampering in the power distribution center. After the officers passed, Marcus continued with the installation. The second dampener was more difficult to position because the stress patterns at this junction were more complex. He had to adjust the mounting angle several times before the device locked into the correct position. The change in the metal song was more noticeable this time. The trilithium steel was still under dangerous stress, but the rate of crack propagation was slowing. Marcus allowed himself a moment of hope. If he could install enough dampeners at the right locations, he might be able to stabilize the structure long enough for the station to be evacuated. The third installation point was in the most dangerous location of all, directly beneath the primary weapons array. Marcus had to crawl through a service tunnel that ran under the massive plasma cannons, surrounded by power conduits and cooling systems that hummed with barely contained energy. The tunnel was hot and filled with electromagnetic interference that made his tablet readings unreliable. As he worked his way toward the weapons platform, Marcus heard footsteps in the corridor above. The voices were clearer here, and he recognized one of them as belonging to Engineer Vorth. The Valkyrie was leading a team of technicians to assess the damage from the power failure. "The weapon systems are undamaged," Vorth was saying. "The power interruption occurred before any significant energy discharge. We can resume the demonstration within the hour." Marcus felt his heart sink. They were planning to restart the weapons test, which would create exactly the harmonic conditions that would complete the cascade failure. He had to work faster. The third dampener installation was the most critical because this location bore the highest stress loads when the weapons fired. Marcus positioned the device carefully and activated its mounting system. The dampener locked into place just as he heard more footsteps approaching his hiding place. "Check all the maintenance areas," a voice commanded. The saboteur could be hiding anywhere in the service tunnels. Marcus gathered his tools and crawled deeper into the tunnel system. He needed to reach at least 2 more installation points to have any chance of stopping the structural failure, but the security search was getting closer. He could hear officers opening access panels and checking every possible hiding place. The fourth installation point was near the living quarters section, where thousands of civilians were still celebrating the successful completion of the station. Marcus could hear music and laughter filtering down through the deck plates as he crawled through the narrow tunnels. None of them knew that the structure around them was slowly tearing itself apart. As he worked on installing the fourth dampener, Marcus heard his name being announced over the station's communication system. Admiral Zet was ordering him to surrender himself immediately. The announcement described him as a dangerous saboteur who had threatened the safety of everyone on the station. Marcus almost laughed at the irony. He was the only person trying to save the station, but the official announcement made him sound like a terrorist. He finished installing the dampener and moved toward the final installation point. The fifth location was the most difficult to reach because it was in a heavily monitored section near the station's command center. Marcus had to time his movement carefully to avoid the security cameras and motion sensors. He crawled through utility conduits and behind equipment panels, always staying one step ahead of the search teams. The trilithium steel song was becoming more erratic as the stress patterns changed with each dampener installation. In some sections, the metal had fallen silent as the harmonic vibrations were absorbed. In others, new frequencies were emerging as the stress load shifted to different parts of the structure. Marcus reached the final installation point just as he heard an announcement that the weapons demonstration would resume in 30 minutes. The station's engineers had completed their assessment and declared the power system safe for operation. Admiral Zet wanted to complete the ceremony as planned to show the galaxy that a minor technical glitch could not disrupt the greatest engineering achievement in history. The fifth dampener was the largest and most complex of the devices Marcus had built. It had to handle multiple harmonic frequencies simultaneously, while being small enough to fit in the confined space of the service tunnel. The installation required precise calibration to match the specific stress patterns at this location. Marcus worked as quickly as he dared, knowing that security teams were getting closer with each passing minute. He could hear them methodically checking each section of the maintenance areas. It would only be a matter of time before they found him. The dampener clicked into place just as flashlight beams appeared at the end of the tunnel. Marcus had been found. "There he is," a voice shouted. "The saboteur is in Maintenance Tunnel 7 Alpha." Marcus dropped his tools and tried to crawl away, but the tunnel was too narrow for quick movement. Security officers grabbed his legs and pulled him out of the access way. Within moments, he was surrounded by armed guards and bound with restraints that made it impossible to move his arms. "Dr. Marcus Reed," Admiral Zet's voice came over a portable communicator. "You are under arrest for sabotage, terrorism, and endangering the lives of galactic citizens. You will be held in detention until formal charges can be filed." As the security team marched him toward the detention area, Marcus could see Engineer Vorth examining the dampeners he had installed. The Valkyrie engineer was scanning the devices with a handheld analyzer, frowning at the readings he was getting. "What are these things?" Vorth asked one of his assistants. "Unknown devices attached to the structural support beams," the assistant replied. "They appear to be some kind of vibration absorption system." "Remove them immediately," Vorth ordered. "Any unauthorized modifications to the station structure must be eliminated before we can safely resume operations." Marcus tried to speak, to explain that the dampeners were the only thing preventing a catastrophic failure, but the security guards forced him to keep moving. He watched in horror as Vorth's team began dismantling the devices that represented the station's only hope for survival. Within minutes, all 5 dampeners had been removed and taken away for analysis. The trilithium steel began singing again with its original complex harmonies, and Marcus could see new cracks forming in the support beams as the stress patterns returned to their dangerous configurations. The security team locked him in a small detention cell with no windows and no way to communicate with the outside. Marcus sat on the narrow bunk and listened to the metal singing around him. In 20 minutes, Admiral Zet would order the weapons test to resume. The full barrage would create the exact harmonic conditions needed to complete the cascade failure. Marcus had done everything he could to save the station, but it had not been enough. The aliens' pride and prejudice had doomed them all, and there was nothing more he could do to stop what was coming. Marcus sat in his detention cell and listened to the countdown echoing through the station's communication system. Admiral Zet's voice was calm and confident as he announced that the weapons demonstration would now proceed as originally planned. The minor technical difficulties had been resolved, and the galaxy would witness the full power of the orbital defense platform. 10 minutes until final weapons test, the Admiral announced. All personnel not directly involved in the demonstration should remain in designated safe areas. Marcus pressed his ear against the wall of the cell and could hear the trilithium steel singing with increasing intensity. Without the harmonic dampeners to absorb the vibrations, the structural stress was building toward the critical threshold. He calculated that the station had perhaps 15 minutes of stability, remaining once the weapons fired at full power. The detention area was located in one of the safest sections of the station, deep within the central hub where the structural supports were strongest. Marcus had specifically designed his emergency protocols to ensure that this area would remain intact longer than the rest of the station. It was a bitter irony that he would have the best seat in the house to watch his predictions come true. 5 minutes until weapons test, Admiral Zed announced. Final safety checks are now complete. All systems are operating within normal parameters. Marcus could hear the excitement in the voices of the dignitaries as they prepared to witness the demonstration. Through the walls of the cell, he could pick up fragments of conversation from the main ceremony hall. Representatives from 47 worlds were about to see what they believed would be a triumph of galactic engineering. Instead, they were about to witness the greatest disaster in the history of space construction. The weapon systems began their power-up sequence with a deep humming sound that vibrated through the entire structure. Marcus felt the deck plates beneath his feet begin to oscillate as the massive plasma cannons drew energy from the station's quantum reactors. The frequency was exactly what he had predicted, and was already pushing the trilithium steel toward its failure point. 2 minutes until weapons test, the Admiral announced. All personnel should brace for minor vibrations during the firing sequence. Minor vibrations, Marcus thought bitterly. If only they knew what was really about to happen. The trilithium steel song was becoming more complex as different sections of the structure began to resonate at their natural frequencies. Marcus could identify individual support beams by their unique harmonic signatures. The main structural junction where he had installed his first dampener was singing at 790 Hz. The weapons platform supports were oscillating at 805 Hz. When the plasma cannons fired, they would add the final frequency component that would create perfect destructive resonance. 30 seconds until weapons test, Admiral Zed announced. Firing sequence will commence on my mark. Marcus closed his eyes and tried to prepare himself for what was about to happen. He had run the calculations dozens of times, and he knew exactly how the failure would progress. The cascade would begin at the weapons platform, where the stress loads were highest. From there, it would spread to the main support structure within minutes. The station would not simply break apart like a normal building collapse. The trilithium steel would tear itself apart at the molecular level, creating a destruction unlike anything anyone had ever seen. 10 seconds. 9, 8, 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Fire. The plasma cannons discharged a sound like thunder that shook the entire station. Marcus felt the vibrations travel through the deck plates and up through his body. For a moment, everything seemed normal. The weapons fired successfully, sending brilliant streams of energy toward distant target drones. The assembled dignitaries applauded the impressive display of firepower. Then the screaming began. It started as a high, keening wail that seemed to come from everywhere at once. The trilithium steel was no longer singing in harmony. Instead, it was producing a discordant shriek of metal under stress that grew louder and more terrible with each passing second. The sound was unlike anything Marcus had ever heard in his laboratory tests. It was the sound of an entire structure dying. The first visible failure occurred at the primary weapons platform. One of the massive support pylons that held the plasma cannons began to twist and buckle as the trilithium steel lost its molecular cohesion. The metal did not break cleanly. Instead, it seemed to melt and flow like liquid while still maintaining its solid appearance. The pylon collapsed in slow motion, sending one of the enormous weapons tumbling into space. The failure spread faster than Marcus had calculated. The quantum enhancements that made trilithium steel so strong also made its destruction more spectacular. As the molecular bonds broke down, they released energy in the form of light and heat. Sections of the station began to glow with an eerie blue radiance as they tore themselves apart. In the main ceremony hall, panic erupted as the assembled dignitaries realized that something was terribly wrong. The applause turned to screams as the deck plates beneath their feet began to buckle and warp. Emergency alarms blared throughout the station, but many of the warning systems were located in sections that were already failing. Marcus could hear Admiral Zet's voice over the communication system, but the Admiral's calm confidence had been replaced by barely controlled terror. All personnel to emergency stations. This is not a drill. Repeat, all personnel to emergency stations. The screaming of the trilithium steel grew louder as more sections of the structure began to fail. Marcus could identify the collapse of individual components by their unique death songs. The secondary weapons array collapsed with a shriek like breaking glass. The main computer core fell silent as its support structure liquefied. The living quarters section produced a low, mournful wail as its framework twisted out of shape. Through the chaos, Marcus could hear Engineer Vortha's voice on the emergency channels. The Valkyrie engineer was trying to coordinate damage control efforts, but his teams were reporting failures throughout the station. Section 7 is completely compromised, one technician reported. The trilithium steel is behaving in ways that our models cannot predict. Impossible, Vorth replied, but his voice lacked its usual certainty. Trilithium steel does not fail in this manner. There must be some external cause. Marcus almost smiled despite the horror of the situation. Even as their masterpiece destroyed itself around them, the alien engineers could not accept that their understanding of the material had been fundamentally flawed. The collapse accelerated as the cascade failure reached the central support structure. The massive beams that formed the backbone of the station began to sing their death songs, each one producing a different note in a symphony of destruction. The harmony was hauntingly beautiful and utterly terrifying. Emergency shuttles began launching from the station's docking bays as evacuation procedures went into effect. Marcus could see them through the small window in his detention cell, tiny sparks of light fleeing from the dying structure. He hoped that the evacuation routes he had designed would save as many lives as possible. The detention area shook violently as a major support beam failed somewhere nearby. The emergency lighting flickered and went out, leaving Marcus in darkness except for the eerie blue glow that was beginning to emanate from the walls themselves. The trilithium steel was releasing its stored quantum energy as it broke down, creating patterns of light that rippled to the metal like aurora. Marcus heard footsteps in the corridor outside his cell. The door burst open, and Commander Rex appeared in the doorway with 2 security officers. The Krex military officer looked shaken but determined. "Dr. Reed," Rex said urgently, "we need your help. The evacuation routes are failing faster than we anticipated. Our engineers cannot predict which sections will collapse next." "Where's Engineer Vorth?" Marcus asked as he stood up from his bunk. "Trapped in Section 12 when the main corridor collapsed," Rex replied. "You are the only person on this station who seemed to understand what is happening to the structure." Marcus followed Rex through corridors that were warping and twisting as the trilithium steel framework continued its molecular breakdown. The walls glowed with shifting patterns of blue and silver light, and the screaming of failing metal was so loud that they had to shout to communicate. "The evacuation routes I designed are marked in the emergency protocols," Marcus explained as they hurried toward the main command center. "They follow the natural stress patterns of the structure. The sections marked in red will fail first, yellow will fail within 30 minutes, and green should remain stable for at least an hour." Rex activated his communication device and began relaying Marcus's information to the evacuation teams. "All units, follow the human emergency protocols. Avoid red sections completely. Minimize time in yellow sections. Use green corridors for primary evacuation routes." They reached the command center just as another major section of the station collapsed. Through the observation windows, Marcus could see entire segments of the structure breaking away and tumbling into space. The orbital defense platform that had been the pride of galactic engineering was tearing itself apart in the most spectacular failure in recorded history. Admiral Zet was coordinating the evacuation efforts with grim efficiency. When he saw Marcus enter the command center, his expression showed a mixture of anger and desperate hope. "Dr. Reed," the Admiral said, "can this destruction be stopped?" Marcus looked at the displays showing the cascade failure spreading throughout the station. The trilithium steel was beyond saving now. The molecular breakdown had progressed too far to be reversed. "No," Marcus said quietly, "but I can tell you which sections will fail next and how much time you have to get people out." For the next hour, Marcus worked with the evacuation teams to guide survivors to safety. His understanding of structural failure patterns, dismissed as primitive by the alien engineers, became the key to saving thousands of lives. The emergency protocols he had designed in secret proved to be remarkably accurate as the station collapsed in exactly the sequence he had predicted. The last shuttle launched just as the central hub began its final collapse. Marcus watched from the shuttle's window as the orbital defense platform completed its transformation from engineering marvel to cosmic debris. The trilithium steel continued to scream and glow as it tore itself apart, creating a light show that could be seen from the surface of Nexus Prime. The investigation that followed revealed the full scope of the engineering failure. Marcus's warnings, documented in dozens of reports that had been dismissed and ignored, painted a clear picture of a disaster that could have been prevented. The quiet human engineer who had been considered too primitive to understand advanced materials had been right about everything. In the aftermath, the Galactic Engineering Consortium implemented new safety protocols based on Marcus's recommendations. No major construction project would proceed without thorough testing of all materials under actual operational conditions. The principle of harmonic resonance in quantum-enhanced metals became a standard part of engineering education throughout the galaxy. Marcus was appointed as the first human chief safety inspector for galactic engineering projects. His job was to ask the simple questions that brilliant minds sometimes overlooked and to ensure that practical knowledge received the same respect as theoretical advancement. The orbital defense platform was never rebuilt, but its destruction served a greater purpose. The galaxy learned that wisdom could come from unexpected sources, and that the quiet voice in the corner, asking basic questions about fundamental physics, might be the most important voice in the room.